Welcome to a special edition of Keeping It Real, panel discussions with entrepreneurs who have shared their stories in our guest blog and join us to discuss topics trending in business. Our guests each started a podcast that was true to their brand, sharing both life experience and business tips, featuring guests that would be seen, heard, found, and hired. Our topic: there's no manual for a successful show. As a podcast host, I'm sure our guests will agree there's a lot of trial and error along the way with a learning curve that supports each episode. Today, we're going to discuss a few tips from behind the scenes. To help us explore the topic, I'd like to introduce you to our expert panel and their shows. Lynn McLaughlin has taken the helm. Danielle Joworski, the Visibelle CEO. Patricia Muir, Executive Encore, and Tree Ride, the root of it all with Tree. And of course, our show, Business Mentorship, Keepin It Real. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everybody.
Hello, everybody.
You know, it's so wonderful to have you guys on your side of the mic because we're going to talk a little bit later about what side we prefer. And I have to say that after doing over 200 shows, I now prefer being on this side of the mic. So as we begin to discuss our topic for today, I'd like to start by asking Lynn, what was the motivation behind your show?
Oh, well, connects to what you do, share your stories.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So I'm a writer. I've been a journaler for my entire life. It's been very cathartic for me on many different levels, but there are different ways of telling our stories. And when I survived a life-threatening illness 10 years ago now, and I started to discover all of the people around me who'd gone through something very similar, but were keeping it private for their own reasons, wanted to tell their story, weren't sure how to tell their story. And so that's how I started the podcast. At that point in time, it was people who'd had experienced crises, but found a way through. And that takes on many different realms because crises, it's a huge envelope, right? Sure. And that was wonderful. It was just a year and a half ago, we rebranded to being proactive for children and youth emotional well-being. And it's the same thing. It's people sharing their expertise and their stories so that others can learn. We can learn with and from each other.
Yeah, that's really what I think what we're all trying to do, right? Is share a little bit of education. Mm-hmm. Danielle, what was the theme? Why did you choose the theme, the Visibelle CEO?
For me, it all started with becoming more visible and really wanting to help entrepreneurs become more visible in their business. The Visibelle CEO really took off, and it took the name from the fact that in my business, I focus on visibility because I am a second time around entrepreneur. The first time around didn't fare so well because I failed to be visible. I had a paralyzing fear of the camera, and I had a really hard time putting myself out there. So I was not being seen and heard, which means I could not be found and hired. So when I became an entrepreneur the second time, after overcoming my fear of the camera and creating and hosting a TV show for 3 seasons, I really wanted to continue providing a platform for female entrepreneurs to be seen and heard so they could be found and hired. So it's all about being visible. And how do you do that in ways that feel good? So that's where the Visibelle CEO came from. So it's all about visibility, which is what I do. And the CEO part is really because we are the CEOs of our business. I'm from corporate, so CEOs is the language I speak all the time. When I became an entrepreneur, I found that there's almost this barrier for entrepreneurs to see themselves as the CEO of their own business, even though it was theirs. So bringing those two pieces together, focusing on visibility, and then helping others to realize that you are and need to be, as an entrepreneur, a more visible CEO.
That's so true. Now, Patricia, really, what was the motivation for yours? Because your show really is about almost saying the encore in life. So is there something that actually sort of gave you the idea or pushed you in the direction of starting your podcast?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was a comment that was made by a person that I worked with many years ago. I met him in a local mall. I was in my business clothes. He was walking the mall with other seniors. And he said to me with quite disgust in his voice, "Are you still working?" I said, yes, and I love my work. And so, oh, okay. So he just sort of dismissed me. And I left the mall and that conversation thinking, this is a choice that a lot of women make. And it's not just for the money. It is because we have so much to contribute and we want to continue to contribute and have what you would call an encore after corporate life, after our other business, whatever we do. And so I wanted to validate that choice and also give women a voice so that they can share with everyone else. This is why I do this kind of work when I'm at this particular part of my life. Now, since then, I've had younger women come to me and say, you know, I have come across crossroads in my life and my career as well. I would like to be a guest. I'd like to tell my story. So it has morphed from, it used to be for those women who are approaching the crossroads of 60 and 70 and beyond. And I have interviewed women in their 70s that are still going strong with their businesses and they love it. But it's now gone to the crossroads of 40, 50, 60 and beyond. So it has evolved in its own way.
Good for you. And I love the theme. We're all doing things for visibility, which I think is really important, and the reason, probably the premise or the grassroots reason why we start these things. Now, Tree, you would be, I guess, the most recent folks to a podcast. So give me an idea as to what was the theme for you and what was the motivation and theme behind your podcast?
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Trish. This is exciting, and I love this conversation here. And so the motivation was really about seeing clients coming into the Burlington Hypnosis Center struggling in some way, shape, or form. And the biggest theme was that talking about not being seen or heard is the fact that they felt alone going through whatever it is that they were going through. And when they show up at the Burlington Hypnosis doorstep, they begin to realize quite quickly that they're not alone. So with the podcast, interviewing all kinds of different people and showing the human behavior and the commonalities between the struggles of human behavior and learning how to vaccinate against those common denominators when it comes to us as humans and us sabotaging ourselves, because we do that quite often, not on purpose. Yeah. So it really is, the motivation was to get people to know that they're not alone and learning from all walks of life. You know, I've interviewed anyone from like my kickboxing coach I just recently an Indigenous woman that teaches like the blanket ceremonies, which is absolutely beautiful. Wow, so it's really all walks of life and just teaching everybody that we are all just humans.
You know, we do what we do because I think we have a human connection, right? We're all making a connection with our guests. But I don't know about you, but there was never a manual on how to make a podcast successful. So, you know, we all had motivation, we all had a theme, but I'm sure that, like me, you had to overcome obstacles to get your podcast sort of up and running and get it visible. So I'm going to ask Danielle, you know, you mentioned that your fear was of the camera. Was that the only thing that you had to overcome in order to break the barriers to get your podcast up and running?
Oh, no. the camera was a big one, but then it became, well, what platform? There's so many options for hosting a podcast, and it became, well, which one do you want to choose? I didn't want to get it wrong. And then what I did is I just looked at, when I was a guest on other people's platforms, what were they using? What was the easiest platform for me to use as a guest? And then also what platforms had a free option? That way I could trial different platforms, what felt the best for me, what was providing that great guest experience. And then that's how I picked my platforms that I was on. And then now I'm more comfortable. I like to trial and I like to experiment. This platform that you're on, I've never used this one as a host myself. So I'm really curious to see it on that side as well. But definitely the camera was number one. And then how to pick how to
Right.
pick that
Right.
platform to
Yeah.
start
How to
using.
pick the platform. What about you, Patricia? I mean, we all have areas of expertise in our, I love the corporate life, how you mentioned that, we've had a corporate career and we've made that leapfrog into being an entrepreneur. And, when we start a podcast, we're like, oh, this sounds like a really great idea. Now what? So what was the barrier that you had to overcome in order to become a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera?
I think similar to Danielle is the technology changes so rapidly as well, right? And do you invest in this and do you invest in that? In the beginning, Trish, I actually had the lights, everything, and I traveled to the site to interview my guests.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah. So I still have those lights. I wish I could, right? But now it's so easy to do on video that now it's just a matter of, is the tool still doing what you want it to do? And I recently decided to go back to some basics rather than live stream, because I found that live stream wasn't working for my guests and wasn't working for me either in the way of making it more visible. So I've gone back from live streaming to actually recording the videos again and actually adding a little bit of the drama from an intro and an outro, which a live doesn't give you that, right?
Right.
So,
Sure.
the advice changes all the time. My biggest challenge, I think, is keeping up with what YouTube is pushing out there. Like, you have to change your way of doing it on a regular basis. And it does require having someone who is a bit of an expert on telling you, something's changed now. We have to change the way you're doing things. And that's what I find a challenge.
Right. What about you, Trey? Because I mean, you're exploring, you're in the exploration stage, I'm sure, of trying to, make a commitment to a platform, and, you're hearing some great advice about, ditch the lights, just go with what we've got, right? So what were some of the barriers that you had to overcome for your podcast?
Well, first and foremost, when I think this is a little bit of a comedic one, is I hate makeup. And I never wear makeup, and I'm not wearing makeup right now. And so I just had to make a decision because I went through a phase of buying makeup, learning. I hired someone to teach me how to put it on, or all of this stuff. So I just went, you know what, my time.
Gotta be you.
Yeah. I was my time is okay, am I going to spend 30 minutes every single time I did something? And I added it up. That's over 3 hours a week. So that's 12 hours a month that I would so I was just kind of I had to make that decision. And then it was the volume, so sound. And then because I wasn't doing it myself, because I have a team, we got that figured out. And then it was the process of creating the collateral, giving the collateral to the guest, even the clips. So we actually have a really good process right now, and kudos to my team. I can't take credit in any of that. So yeah, it was just, those were, I think, would say the biggest ones, because everyone, I know the makeup thing, it sounds silly, but I don't know. It was just
it's part of your image too, right?
I just decided. I was like, that's it. Yeah.
Well, we love that you're au naturel, because you know what? Then that just speaks more to you as the individual, right? Now, Lynn, you and I have traded secrets, shall we say? You've given me some great ideas in terms of editing platforms, and we've shared different things about lighting and all of those sorts of things. So you've been a great collaborator with me on sort of polishing the podcast. But is there something that you can remember when you first started that you had to break some barriers to get comfortable?
Oh yeah. And everything that's been said so far so resonates with me. But okay, just a little bit of context here. I was just finishing a professional speaking course related to my business as an entrepreneur, not my previous role in education. And the person who was running it challenged me to be a podcast host and interview him.
Oh, wow.
That's really the way it started. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So I thought, yeah, we're going to do this. And then all the branding and the platform and all those kinds of things. But I would say, don't go back 4.5 years ago. Listen, actually, I think I've taken them off now. But I was so caught up. I mentioned earlier I had life-threatening illness. It was a brain tumor, and I'd had brain surgery. And I was so caught up in being able to articulate things, ask the right questions, not mumble up my words, that I had things scripted. And so instead of, my guest would be answering a question, and I would be thinking ahead to what was I going to ask him next, and was totally lost in the conversation. I wasn't part of the conversation. It wasn't real. It didn't flow. So I'd say, probably less than 10 episodes. And I just thought, no, I'm just going to be me. I have an acquired brain injury. It's what it's going to be. I'm going to bumble over my words, and I do. But what I do now to prepare is every guest that I have, I do a get to know you call. So we have a conversation, a good half-hour conversation. I get to know them. We can connect. Some of them, not a great fit for the podcast. Here, I'll make some recommendations for you. But that call allows me to know more about them, see what their platform is. They give me 6 big ideas we're going to talk about, and then we just have a natural conversation. So that was a confidence thing at the building, which I think many of us, in some degree, whether it's makeup or the platform or how you get your guests, I think there's something like that for all of us. That was mine. That was my big one.
No, that's so true. I'm going to ask and I won't say show of hands because it's a podcast. People need to hear your answer. Does anyone, so Lynn has given us some pretty good clues as to how she gets ready in terms of interviewing her guests. I certainly use the guest blog as the background information because we have, the website has your story on it. So I go to your story, I read your story. That is what gives me an indication as to the type of questions that I'm going to ask. But does anyone have some scripted questions that they ask beforehand? Just say yes or no. Danielle, do you have scripted questions that you ask beforehand, or is it organic?
No, all organic.
All organic. Tree?
Yeah, all organic.
Organic, yeah. Patricia?
Yes, and I interview like Lynn, so it's very organic, and the guest decides on what the key points are going to be.
Right. And Lynn, yours is organic as well, right? After you've had that initial conversation.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what gives the podcast style, right? Is that, people will listen not just because of the guest, but how we manage the conversation, right? Giving people an opportunity to be seen and heard, that they want to be able to share their story. And I think that's what makes every podcast successful, is how the host handles the interview process. Would anyone like to add anything to the interview process in terms of, how you become comfortable with meeting with each guest?
I think your first few guests can be people you know.
Yes.
With the comfort zone. Obviously, they fit with your mission and your vision and the message that you're trying to send out. But if it's people you've got that comfort, and then you start to build that confidence, it becomes more natural.
Right. Tree?
I find connecting with a person energetically, like stepping into sort of their model of the world, allows just the whole vibe to grow on its own. Right. Like whoever it is. So that's sort of my process.
Right. Danielle?
For me, I know all my guests. Typically, there's no online platform just to apply. So it's in conversation. We have a great conversation. It becomes, hey, you know what? I've got this platform. I'm on hiatus right now over the summer. I said, but would you want to? And I've never had anyone say no, because you've always had this great rapport already. Like Tree was saying, there's an energy, there's a chemistry. It becomes, let's continue this conversation and let's record it for others to hear.
Oh, that's cool. Patricia?
Interesting that this question, Trish, because I find the opposite to be true. The guest sometimes wants the script. They want to know, what questions are you going to ask me? How should I respond? And so my response to them is that you will be taking the stage, like prepare them. They are your talking points. And I will do whatever I can do to continue the conversation and make it a positive experience for you.
Right. And I think that's what makes you a great host, right?
Yes. Yeah. And sometimes I do a little bit of research on their points and on them as well, of course, so that it can be more natural for us to both collaborate on making it a positive experience.
Right. Now, Danielle, you mentioned how you get your guests, that there's a warm introduction there. These are people that you've met in your community. So you're familiar with their businesses and so on and so forth. So that there's obviously a synergy there when you get to the platform for the interview process. Tree, how do you find your guests? Are you using a warm referral, or how do you find the connection?
Actually, anyone that is close to me knows that I just get around, for lack of a better word, and just completely random, that like I could be at a restaurant and then all of a sudden start up a conversation with the business owner, and then just I'm part of a BNI group, and I'll have a conversation. We have like one-to-ones, and we end up in a conversation. I'd be like, wow, this would be a really good podcast episode. I just had one recently with this guy, he creates apps, and we got into this spirituality conversation.
Wow.
So yeah, so that is going to be another podcast, because like somebody that is that tech, to be that, not to categorize or judge, but it was such a fascinating conversation.
Wow.
So I think that's really interesting for other people to hear about, to expand the walls of what people would put into a certain box.
Yeah, for sure. Now, Lynn, your podcast has morphed a little bit from the beginning, where you had mentioned that you were sharing more personal stories, and now you're providing more of an education platform for children. But how do you find guests for your show?
It's still very much professional as well. These are educators, these are clinicians, these are people who have experience, there are parents. So there's that piece of it too. But I'm very much like Tree. Well, maybe less organically, but it's referral. I don't recall ever having to go out looking for guests, because I don't have anybody I'm lined up right now till November. And it's referrals. So another guest will say, oh my goodness, or in our get to know that you call, we'll say, hey, there's someone else this resonates with. Let me connect you by email. So we do a lot of that kind of thing. Some are in person, but I want to jump in what Tree just said, because my most recent guest, ironically, was about educational technology and connecting not just the instructional component of math and reading, et cetera, but the well-being component on the other side. So it's interesting that our tech world is starting to morph in that direction. Just a little side note.
Yeah.
That is great. Yeah. And Patricia, how do you find guests?
Well, because my podcast is specific towards women's lives, I have a large women's network that has been curated for over the last 30 years. So much of it is my connections, and that could lead to another referral. I have had people approach me on LinkedIn because they want to find out more about what I do. So I respond and I say, after looking at their LinkedIn profile,
sure,
this might be of interest to you, because obviously you want a little more exposure, right? So I have one like that coming up today. So it comes from many different places.
Right. Now, okay, so we've all been in front of the mic, because we've all been podcast guests, and then we've taken the leap, and now we're a podcast host. But you must have a preference. So, I shared my preference now is to be behind the mic. I kind of feel a little bit more maybe in control, shall we say, or a little more comfortable guiding the conversation. But ladies, where do you see yourself? Tree, do you prefer to be on your side of the mic today as a guest, or do you prefer to be the host?
I love being the host, because my natural state is in curiosity. So through curiosity, that's where a lot of the questions, I'm genuinely interested, and I want to know, and playful and stuff like that. So I like asking the questions.
Perfect. Danielle, what do you prefer?
I'm much like you and Tree, where I prefer to be the host. Just a little, like you, have a little bit of control piece, but it's also just, I love just asking questions and getting to really highlight, and then position and promote other people and the brilliance that they have.
Yeah, it's the give back almost, right? Like there's the curiosity about learning something about the guest, but then you never know where the conversation's going to unfold. And that's what I find is really, quite entertaining and remarkable is, the conversation can lead into a totally different direction. So that's one of the things that I love. Lynn, what do you prefer, guest or host?
Oh, host for sure. I guess the part about the host that I love so much is people who have trepidation, who have a story to tell, who have something to teach us all, and giving them the opportunity to do that in a place that's comfortable, which allows them to say, wave the hand and say, oh, I made a mistake there. Can I do this again if we pre-record? And I learned something or many things from every single guest.
I say the same thing. Yeah, it's symbiotic, right? Like it's the sharing of information is just so electrifying. And Patricia, what about you? Host or guest?
The host, for the very reason that Lynn says, is that we're able to draw out from our guests and give them a voice. And that is the theme of my podcast. So it makes sense, right? Yeah. But I sure love the opportunity to be on the other side as well. Yeah. So I appreciate this opportunity because it's fun. It's fun also.
It's a little different, right? It challenges some different skills. So, well, thank you, ladies, for being guests because, you're all hosts. So we're all doing a really good job of giving each other an opportunity to be seen and heard. So thank you so much for that. Now, what channels do you prefer to feature your show? Because this particular podcast is also done in video. And so we have a YouTube channel. So there's the YouTube channel where we show the video. And then obviously it's available on podcasts for those folks who are on the move. I'll ask the question this way. Where do you get the largest numbers? Is it on the video channel or is it in the actual listening on the podcast? Danielle, where do you find that you get the most viewers or listeners?
So for me, I'm only on YouTube. I have not actually ventured off into the audio only side of things. So just for me, it's YouTube. Eventually, and there's that technology piece that has been preventing me from going to the audio, but that's a goal to work towards.
All right. What about you, Tree? Which do you seem to get more traction, video or audio?
And actually, I get more traction on video, which when I first started it, I thought, why am I going to put it on YouTube? I probably won't get anything. But like Danielle, it's people actually more on video than. But with that too, I'm probably the newest podcast out of everybody here, and so I haven't really fully promoted through other channels. So I'm curious. And I literally had a meeting with my team this morning about this. So we'll see. Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
And Patricia, what about you? Video or audio?
It's hard to say because I do watch the numbers, but I'm not on there every day, every week, right? Mm-hmm. But I started out with YouTube. So I've been on YouTube for several years. Now I have a very what you call a micro niche. So it's not going to blow up and be viral overnight or anything like that. Right. But I think that the podcast is helping. So the two of them work together and you're doing the same thing. It just goes through one channel and then the other channel. So why not use both?
Sure. And Lynn?
I have a YouTube channel, but when I started broadcasting live on Voice America Radio about 1.5 years ago, that's live radio, right? And then that gets fed out to Anchor. Well, not Anchor anymore. Anchor is now Spotify, which is the podcaster I go with, and Apple and Google and all of those other things. So it makes it easier. You're just publishing from one platform and then you set it out so everything's connected and your podcast gets out there. I'll be curious in October when I go back to publishing through Spotify to see how that takes off on YouTube. But I haven't actually made the decision if I'm going to continue to do it on video because I'm starting to have guest hosts and moving back into the production person in the background as the producer as opposed to the host, which is going to be interesting for me too. So,
oh, wow. We've got some great things to follow up on, right? In terms of numbers and where we see, to everyone's point, the platforms are always changing. And so is, I think, our target audience. So we have to sort of keep up with where they would like to see us. So some really great tips. Thank you very much, ladies, for sharing all of that expertise. As we wrap up our discussion, I'd like to ask you to share one word for someone who may be thinking or getting ready to launch their own show based on the experience that you've had so far. What would be the one word that you would share as a piece of advice for those folks? Danielle?
I'll say when it comes to technologies, start with what you know. There's always lots of opportunity to grow, but start with the technology that you know.
Yeah, that's true. Tree?
I'd say passion. Make sure that you're passionate about the content or what it is that you're putting out there, because it comes out in the actual podcast itself.
Yeah, so true. Patricia?
Self-trust. Trust yourself that you have the capabilities and the capacity to have a positive experience.
And Lynn?
Collaborate. You've got 5 of us right here, people with experience. You do not have to be an island trying to figure this out all by yourself. There's lots of us around to help. Just reach out.
Well, listen, ladies, this has been an absolutely wonderful opportunity for us to hear a little bit more of the behind the scenes, because, you know, each one of you have a very polished, formal presentation to your target market. And I think it's really wonderful that we've had an opportunity to give us a little glimpse into some of the issues that happen behind the scenes. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise.
Thank you, Trish. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We certainly appreciate your contributions as business owners and wish you continued success as you lead by example as both role models and mentors in your community. And to our viewing and listening audience, if you'd like to connect with one of our panel guests, you'll find their story and contact information in the description portion below. I'm Trish Tonai, author, artist, and the founder and host for the series. And if you're interested in sharing your business story, visit our website at shareyourstories.online. In the meantime, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel or podcast, your favorite podcast channel, and also to subscribe to all of the shows for the folks that we have featured today. I'd like to thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you next time with another episode of Keeping It Real.